Hey everybody, welcome back. You're with the American Battlefield Trust. I'm Garry Adelman, and here we are on the Cool Springs battlefield, about which you're about to learn quite a bit more. But before we get there, it is the middle of 1864. I think you're familiar that as the Union and Confederate troops are mired around Petersburg and Richmond, that Robert E. Lee is going to detach Jubal Early's men. They're going to go down the Shenandoah Valley. That's going to result, as they turn east, in the Battle of Monocacy, in the Battle of Fort Stevens, where the Union troops man the defenses at Fort Stevens, and Jubal Early's men begin a retrograde movement of sorts, okay? And that's what we're going to start talking about today. Elements of the Union Army, the 6th Corps, joined by people from everybody's favorite campaign, the Red River Campaign, Battle of Mansfield. The 19th Corps are going to join the 6th Corps, and they're going to start to push against Jubal Early's divisions, okay? And this is going to be the start of a series of movements I've heard called the Autumn in the Shenandoah, or the Shenandoah Campaign, or the Shenandoah Valley Campaign of 1864. Some of these early actions, before they actually get into these well-known battles like Winchester and Cedar Creek, are happening in places that are really important, one that we're going to learn a little bit more about from our good friend, staunch preservationist. You can see him on our Cedar Creek app. You can see him on a bunch of our other videos as well. Let me see what else. Professor at Shenandoah University, prolific author, including, I think, the standard work on the Battle of Cool Spring. Come on, Jonathan Noyalas. Thanks for coming.
All right, thanks, Gary. So on the evening of July 12, 1864, as Jubal Early's army was withdrawing from the outskirts of Washington, D.C., heading towards Snickers Gap and the Shenandoah Valley, there was a conversation that took place between him and one of his staff officers, Major Henry Kidd Douglas. And Early very famously told Douglas, "We haven't taken Washington, but we've scared Abe Lincoln like hell." I really don't believe that Abe Lincoln was scared at all as a result of Early's push to the northern boundary of Washington, D.C. If Lincoln felt any emotion on that night of July 12th, it was anger, it was aggravation, because as Early was departing, he immediately wanted Union forces responsible for the defense of the Capitol to chase after Early, but Lincoln didn't get that, because there were 4 different forces responsible for the protection of Washington, D.C., and there was not a single commander in charge of them. And so before that pursuit could be organized, there needed to be one Union general put in charge of the whole. Well, it wasn't until, that following day, July 13th, that Ulysses S. Grant had placed General Horatio Wright, commander of the 6th Army Corps, in charge of that pursuit, and about 25 to 30,000 Union soldiers begin pushing out of Washington, D.C. toward Snickers Gap and toward the Shenandoah Valley. Both Union and Confederate soldiers, as they're moving toward the Shenandoah River in mid-July of 1864, had to deal with extremely high temperatures well above, mid-90s into the, lower 100s. It was extremely dry. It was a miserable march. But Horatio Wright was determined to pursue Jubal Early. So it was on July 17th, 1864, at Castleman's Ferry. So if we just kind of point down in this direction, so we have the Shenandoah River behind us right now, and so about a mile in that direction is Castleman's Ferry. So that's where the Shenandoah River today is crossed by Route 7. So it was there on July 17th, 1864, that Union cavalry, commanded by General Alfred Dufay, attempted to dislodge the Confederates from John B. Gordon's division from Castleman's Ferry. There were repeated assaults that day and into the nighttime, and every single one of those Union assaults, they failed. The following day, it was more of the same. Dufay's men charged down the slopes, tried to attack at Castleman's Ferry, and ultimately they fail. Well, late that morning, General George Crook arrived, and he saw one of these last Union cavalry attacks, and he decided that there had to be a better way. So he met with General Horatio Wright, and they developed this plan to try to flank the Confederate position. So the plan was to move Union forces through passageways and pass in the Blue Ridge Mountains. So if we're looking off in this direction, moving them in pass through the mountains, coming across the property that's now owned by Shenandoah University, known as the Retreat. The Retreat was an 1,100-acre plantation owned by Judge Richard Parker during the Civil War, cross the Shenandoah River right here at Island Ford, then move to the other side, turn south, and attack and flank the Confederate position. So it was with the help of a local man, John Kerrigan. He actually served in this pursuit force. He was a tailor from Castleman's Ferry, actually enlisted at the outset of the war in the Confederate Army, ended up deserting in March of 1862, and then in January of 1864 enlisted in the Maryland unit. So it was John Kerrigan that helped guide these Union forces, about 5,000 of them, so it's not the entire Union pursuit force, so about 5,000 troops commanded by Colonel Joseph Thoburn are going to come through those passways. They're going to cross over the retreat, and about 3 o'clock in the afternoon of July 18th, 1864, they're going to get here to the banks of the Shenandoah. They're going to cross, and Thoburn thought that this would be an uncontested crossing, but in fact there were about 100 Confederate soldiers on the opposite shore, commanded by Major Jesse Richardson from 2 different Virginia regiments. They contested that crossing, but it really was no match for the lead brigade in Thoburn's command, commanded by Colonel George Wells. So after Wells's men secure the crossing here and Thoburn's men move across, there is a great deal of concern starting to brew in the mind of General George Crook. Because as Crook is looking out into the distance, as he's looking to the west, he can see the glimmer of sunlight, shining off of bayonets and shining off of musket barrels as Confederate troops, ultimately from General Gabriel Wharton's division and Robert Rhodes' division, were alerted by the fire that erupted here along the banks of the Shenandoah and were moving very rapidly to Island Ford. And so George Crook at that moment in time is beginning to think we're going to have to alter our plan. And so instead of turning south, he ordered Colonel Thoburn to simply stay put his men in battle array. So today it's really difficult to see, but Thoburn is going to arrange his men in 3 lines. So there's going to be a line of Union troops that hugs the shoreline of the Shenandoah River. There's going to be a line that moves about 75 yards up to the crest of a ridge, and then there'll be a line of skirmishers beyond that. So as Thoburn's men, they cross around 3 o'clock. By about 4 o'clock, they're all on the opposite side. They've had their battle lines arranged, and now they simply are waiting. So the first attack that's going to happen at the Battle of Cool Spring is going to come from General Gabriel Wharton's division. He's going to attack directly in front of where we're at. But as I tell people all the time when they come out to Cool Spring, Gabriel Wharton's attack was not the main attraction, but the main distraction here at the battle, because he wanted to distract Thoburn's attention away from Robert Rhodes' division, which is going to move about 3/4 of a mile north of where we're at and try to flank the Union line. So all throughout that afternoon and into the early part of the evening, it was all sorts of chaos and disarray for Union forces. So when it became apparent to Colonel Thoburn that Wharton was the main distraction, not the main attraction, and that Jubal Early was in fact trying to crush the northern flank of Thoburn's line, Colonel Thoburn decided he has to begin shuffling troops from one end to the other. And as he begins making that arrangement, the Union troops who are responsible for protecting that far right end of the Union line, a group of dismounted cavalry, about 1,000 of them from 27 different regiments, commanded by Colonel Samuel Young, they are responsible for holding that line until the Union forces from this end can be shuffled up to the northern part of the battlefield. Well, according to most accounts, Colonel Samuel Young's command fired 1 volley or 2, and then the lion's share of them broke and fled back to the eastern side of the river. Some people might think this was the result of cowardice. I would actually argue that they are retreating because these guys are fighting as infantry. They're using muskets, not their carbines. They've only had a few weeks to make this transition from cavalry to infantry, and ultimately they are ill prepared. There are all kind of accounts of men in Young's command who are, not tearing the bullet out of the cartridge and separating it as you should, instead just loading the whole thing, or guys, firing a shot and leaving their ramrod up against a tree. And so they have no way to defend themselves, and so they flee. There are other moments in this battle where Thoburn is going to reposition, for example, Colonel Daniel Frost's brigade, and try to wheel them to the north to present a front to Robert Rhodes's assault. But ultimately, as Frost's command is making that movement, Daniel Frost is severely wounded, mortally wounded, shot through the bowels, and all sort of chaos erupts. So within about an hour after this battle begins, Thoburn has lost about 2,000 men who have fled from the battlefield. And at that moment in time, Thoburn is thinking, okay, do we stay and fight, or do we just retreat? For those regiments that remained, they decided it was best to stay and fight and wait until the cover of darkness to pull back across to the eastern side of the Shenandoah River. There were moments in this battle where Thoburn thought he was going to be reinforced. For example, when the engagement started, General Horatio Wright had promised Crook and Thoburn the assistance of General James Ricketts' division from the 6th Corps. But when Ricketts' men get to the banks of the Shenandoah and they see Young's command retreating, they see Frost's command retreating, they believe that there is ultimately nothing to be gained. The only support that Thoburn's command is going to receive all throughout the remainder of this Battle of Cool Spring is going to be from Union artillery, 3 batteries that are placed in the bluffs overlooking the Shenandoah River, 2 Rhode Island batteries, and 1 battery, Battery E, 1st West Virginia Artillery. Those artillery batteries, coupled with the tenacity of the soldiers who remained in Thoburn's command, is going to allow them to survive, to stave off multiple assaults from Rhodes's command, and ultimately, as nightfall descends over the battlefield, get to this side of the river. When Thoburn's command finally retreated, as they finally withdrew to the eastern shore of the Shenandoah, there were a lot of questions these guys had. They wanted to know, why was it that they were not properly supported? Why did Ricketts' men not cross? You have 25,000 men from this Union pursuit force who are on this side of the river watching all of this happen. Why were they left out there to fend for themselves? And this is ultimately something that these guys would fight about in regimental histories, in the pages of the National Tribune, until their deaths, either in the late 1800s, early part of the 20th century. In the grand scheme of things, the Battle of Cool Spring achieved no significant strategic results. There were no major political outcomes from this. Ultimately, Horatio Wright will end up on July the 20th, once Jubal Early learns about a Union force coming from Martinsburg, moving south to Winchester, and Early not wanting to get caught in the middle. Early retreats to Winchester and then moves south to Strasburg. Wright pushes his command a little bit further to the west toward Berryville, ultimately doesn't see Early there, and he believes that Early has in fact left the valley, which Early, of course, a very stubborn, cantankerous man, is not going to give up that easily. But after it was all said and done, Assistant Secretary of War Charles Dana, he looked at that Union pursuit from Washington, D.C. He looked at the battle that was fought here and ultimately said that at the end of the day, it achieved absolutely nothing. But while this battle might not have achieved anything militarily or politically, to the soldiers who fought here, to the family members who lost a loved one here, this battle was, as Confederate veteran John Alexander Steichler wrote decades after the battle, it was the most important battle of the war.
Thanks so much, Jonathan.
Thank you.
Super interesting stuff. And I agree, like, we shouldn't just study the battles because they're more popular, because there's a movie made about them or something like that. And when you sort of stand here, it's hard to imagine what went on here. I mean, the beauty of the place, the whole valley, just really belies the terrible events that took place here in 1862 and 1864, and at other times too. Let me just say a couple of things. One, he kept mentioning Joseph Thoburn. I mean, it's a name you don't hear a lot of. A lot of people might start studying the war in the East, and they've heard of Jubal Early and Horatio Wright, and they've heard of Russell and Getty, Gordon and Ramseur and Rhodes, but then you start getting into these valley fights, and it'll do you some good as you start to study it, to learn about people like Bricktop Emery and the likes of Joseph Thoburn and George Crook in the 8th Corps and Duval and so many other people. So keep that in mind. One more thing, and there's a great closing to this story, and that is in 2012. This used to be a golf course, and the owners of that golf course ultimately are going to sell this property, clubhouse and all. We got a lot of golf clubs, I think, when this thing went through, to the members of the American Battlefield Trust. We worked with our really good friends at Shenandoah University, turned it over to them, who stewards it to this day with flying colors. And when we came out this morning, there were people exercising, they were reading the signs. It's the perfect result. We have a preserved battlefield, or part thereof, and we can understand American history a little bit better. So thanks to Andy Poulton behind the camera. Thanks to Jonathan Noyalas for hitting us with all the interpretation. We got a lot more coming. Make sure you check out our coming videos, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and thank you so much for all of your support of battlefield education and preservation.
Hello, this is Trace Atkins. To stay up to date on all the latest and coolest videos, please subscribe to the Trust's YouTube channel. Preserve, educate, inspire.